But the point I was going to make about what Peter Senge's quote and Michael Ray on intuition, you're talking head and heart. And I just want to underscore it. I love the fact in the book you talk about both the practical issues that a salesman needs to know, good listening, the discipline of creative thinking, learning to teach yourself, I don't know. All these really practical skills. At the same time, you're teaching a skill which I would call the integration of spirituality and being in the world.
Right.
The balance was really kind of interesting. How did you come up with such a balance, Alan?
Well, I think we certainly live in a world of duality. I mean, we're physical creatures, but we're essentially spiritual. And of course, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. But I mentioned earlier the pull of ego. We tend to identify with that. It's such a powerful pull. Survival and acceptance and getting ahead and competition and making a name for yourself, and all those drives are very, very powerful in this world, and they keep us safe. And they tend to really drown out the still small voice of who we truly are. And it's not an either-or choice. There's a lot of books now that talk about ego as though it's something that's bad, which also is dualistic. And it's not. It's simply a component of who we are. But we're entering a new, I certainly believe we're entering a new era in which we're much more connected to our spirit, and that we don't see those as opposites battling with each other. We see them both as tools for being fully human. And the workplace is really a place in which that call not only is the most challenging, but I think the most needed. And we're seeing the results. I work here in Manhattan, not far from Wall Street and the big financial service companies, and we're seeing the disastrous results when people forget that we're spiritual beings within a physical body, and they think the physicality is all that matters, and that's the game.
Yeah, and I want to just mention to the viewing audience, we're talking about something here that goes beyond simple ethics. In other words, everybody would, with very few exceptions, would universally agree that ethical conduct actually is good business over time. I think we lost that when we moved out of small-town America, where people knew who we were and our reputations followed us from cradle to grave. I think what you're doing here, though, which I think is much more profound and is much more useful to people in stressful economic times as well as good times, but in stressful economic times, what you're saying is the more you can integrate who you are at essence as a spiritual being with what you do in the workplace, the more you can weave that integration together, the more successful you will be on every level. I mean, isn't that a big part of what you're doing here?
Well, that's right, and I'm really saying when you do that, you will naturally be ethical. You won't need ethical codes of conduct because you'll be connected to the part in which ethics springs naturally, which is your spirit. So not only will you be more successful because you'll be connected more to other people, you'll be a better listener, as you say, you'll be better at anticipating other people's needs. You won't be so involved in your own desires and your own ambitions, which shuts out other people and eventually turns them off. But you'll be happier, and you'll be more in flow. You'll be more successful. You'll come home with more energy instead of less. And you'll really find not only integrating within your work, your spirit, and your body, but anywhere else in your life. And you'll realize that a lot of these boundaries that we've created for ourselves, mind and body, work and home life, relationships, and myself, that those are illusory, that we are an integrated being, as you say.
Yeah, and I know that people really realize this. We often talk about the Academy that there's one of the great lies, one of the absolute great distortions or lies that we're sort of taught subtly, and we accept almost uncritically, is that you really can't do what you love, be who you are, and succeed at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And your book takes a direct shot at this in your philosophy, in which I happen to share personally, because you come from what I would call abundance consciousness, as opposed to scarcity thinking.
Correct.
You come from the fact that I don't have to have less if you have more. In fact, if you have more in a way, it elevates me up. We've written extensively right after 9/11 in the Academy about how the Marshall Plan, which was passed by one vote in Congress in 1947, it's an eloquent story. I won't digress into it. But with that one vote, we launched into rehabilitating our former enemies, Germany initially and then Japan, and from that became the greatest wealth humankind has ever seen, starting in 1947 up through the 60s. that attempt to recognize that if we create for other, it also elevates us both spiritually, but even more importantly in today's world where people are scared, it elevates you monetarily.
Well, that's right.
There is no scarcity.
Well, that's right. And as you say, I mean, if you want to compare abundance to greed, greed is a fear-based reaction, which of course is also an ego-based reaction. As you say, Ronaldo, based on the sense that there's a lack, that there's not enough, that another person's gain is my loss, that leads toward selfishness and hoarding, which eventually leads to depression because you've cut yourself off. Abundance, on the other side, flows from the realization of infinite diversity, of infinite availability, and that if we treat our resources respectfully, there's more than enough for everybody. And from that comes a sense of love and gratitude. And suddenly, instead of seeing money and prosperity as an end in itself, it sees it as a tool for the betterment of other people. And that leads to joy.
Alan, this is Stu. I've got a question for you because you're so close to Wall Street, being based in Manhattan. And, of course, most people seem to think that Wall Street is the antithesis of this conversation by and large.
Yeah.
Where they're still focused on greed, they're still focused on what's in it for me and, what's in it for my bonus this year.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, did they get a surprise yesterday?
Yeah, exactly.
They found out what's in the paycheck is $200,000 max.
Yeah,
This is going to be interesting.
Right.
But go ahead, Stu, with your question.
Yeah, my question is this conversation that we're having, are you seeing any of it infiltrate into Wall Street, which really seems to be hand in hand with the larger corporate America? And is this something that we can hope is some defining moments in a shift in an overall corporate American culture?
Well, there's probably maybe two ways to answer that, and one, and Ronaldo alluded to this, is that a focus on greed is a flash in the pan, and so it simply doesn't work. I mean, so from a functional perspective, it doesn't work, and so as businesses, we get RFPs.
Wait, Alan, just hold that for a second because I want to just underscore that for Stu. So Stu, probably one of the captains of greed, it made a media career, as much as anything, out of preaching the gospel of greed and of negativity and I get mine and if I don't get mine, you don't get yours, was Donald Trump, who, as you know, just went bankrupt again, who has a string of bankruptcies. In fact, Donald's success is that he hasn't had one successful operating business his entire life. Now, I think he's a great media figure. But I point that out not because I like to negate people, because actually I very, very seldom ever say anything negative about anybody. I want to hold this up as an example because the popular culture has Donald Trump in some kind of pedestal as if that's successful business, when in fact the opposite is true. So greed, let loose on itself, ends up, even if you're Donald Trump with all that media power, if you're a billionaire, when greed takes over, you and your friends go broke, or in the case of Donald, at least your friends go broke if you don't.
Right.
And so that's the polar point A. That's the alpha of the alphabet. I'd like Alan, go ahead and address the omega. What happens when you do the opposite?